Extreme cold sweeps the globe. Temperatures plummet by 200 degrees. Blizzards continue to rage. This is not an illusion. The freezing, starving apocalypse has truly arrived. Early in the morning, I was jolted awake by the phone ringing. I picked it up impatiently. It was my aunt, who I hardly ever talked to. Many years ago, after my parents passed away in a car accident, I rarely kept in touch with my relatives. Before I could even say a word, an urgent voice came through the receiver. Lily, you need to listen carefully to every single word I'm about to say. This is not a joke. I remembered my aunt as a woman of few words. Why did she sound so serious today? Did something happen? What's wrong? Auntie, don't scare me. I'm telling you. The latest monitoring from the National Meteorological Center predicts that in 1 month, the world will face an unprecedented, massive, extreme cold wave. The scale will be like an ice age apocalypse. What ice age apocalypse? Isn't that just a real-life version of the day after tomorrow? I was completely baffled. Did my aunt forget to take her meds today? However, right after she said that, her voice abruptly cut off. It sounded like someone snatched the phone and hung up. I was still half asleep anyway, so I didn't take it to heart and went back to sleep. The next day, when I went downstairs to buy some things, I noticed the weather was indeed bizarre. It was already November, yet the sun was still scorching hot. The sky was crystal clear, and I was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, not feeling cold at all. A week passed, and the temperature remained unusually warm, even showing signs of getting hotter. I couldn't help but think about my aunt's warning. She had never been the type to joke with me. I was taken aback and quickly dialed her number, wanting to ask her what exactly was going on. But to my surprise, when I called, a cold, automated female voice answered. The number you have dialed does not exist. How could it become an invalid number? I don't know if it was a woman's intuition, but remembering my aunt's serious tone, I felt a deep sense of unease. Whatever, better safe than sorry. I shouldn't risk it. I had to start preparing today. This winter was exceptionally hot. Even though it was already November, it still felt like an oven outside. And that was exactly the proof of climate anomaly. I rushed into the mall and started a crazy shopping spree. I didn't buy anything else, just thick quilts, thermal wear, and heavy down jackets. I always loved reading apocalyptic and time travel survival novels. But now that the apocalypse might actually be coming, a sudden wave of anxiety and sheer terror washed over me. It turns out reading about it in fiction and experiencing it firsthand are two completely different things. 1 month's time isn't exactly long, but it isn't short either. A week had already passed since I got the news. Adding the few days I spent slacking off, I now had less than 3 weeks left. I couldn't afford to delay the preliminary prep work any longer. I rented a massive villa with an equally huge basement. Under extreme cold, both heating and electricity would eventually fail. When that happened, the basement would be the only place where I could stay alive. Next, I needed to fortify it. I had anti-freeze concrete added to both the interior and exterior walls. Doors and windows were all upgraded to blast-proof grades. After securing the villa, I immediately contacted the best local renovation company. It took a hell of an effort and a lot of extra cash to get it sorted. Even with the schedule set, I still felt anxious. I pulled out my new phone. What? You're asking where my old phone went? My old phone blew up. In the face of natural disasters, humanity is so insignificant. I didn't know if I could survive this catastrophe. But in order to live, I was going to fight with everything I had. Since it was a newly rented place, it was completely empty inside. The supplies I ordered wouldn't arrive until next Monday. So I paid a premium to the construction workers to guarantee both speed and quality. They had to finish the renovations before Monday. Because I paid them generously, the workers were incredibly efficient. Not only did they finish fast, but the quality was excellent too. They actually finished a day earlier than scheduled. I happily paid out the final balance. Before they left, I even kindly reminded them. The temperature is going to drop soon. The weather is about to change. I said what I had to say. Whether they believed it or not was up to them. After all, when the apocalypse hits, I can only look out for myself. I wasn't idle this week either. I bought a massive amount of heat packs and high-capacity camping power stations. During the renovation, I also had the workers install a fireplace and bought plenty of firewood and coal, just in case. Also, in the apocalypse, the human heart is the most terrifying thing. So for the sake of safety, a top-tier security camera system was a must. I also ordered various flavors of instant noodles, self-heating hot pots, self-heating rice, canned goods, compressed biscuits, cured sausages and bacon, chocolates, 500 boxes of rice and flour, 500 bags and 500 jugs of purified water, and 500 cases of bottled water. I bought every kind of long-term storage food imaginable. If it wasn't for the fact that the house literally couldn't fit anymore, I would have emptied out the entire supermarket. In addition, I bought toilet paper, sanitary pads, and all kinds of daily necessities. By the end of it, I couldn't even remember all the things I had bought. In short, this prepping almost worked a delicate girl like me to death. Time flew by. When all the supplies in the house were finally organized, I suddenly felt intensely lonely. At that moment, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Even though I've been living on my own for so many years, the impending apocalypse made me panic and restless. I couldn't help but think, if only my parents were here by my side right now, how great would that be? The temperature was about to drop, and I was swamped with preparations. During this time, just hoarding food had completely filled up the first basement level. I thought the house I rented was already huge, but it still felt far from enough. I continued to buy more. Long-term storage, food, and even stocked up on a ton of alcohol. If the temperature dropped low, drinking could help keep the cold at bay. I also hoarded a massive amount of meat. Meat could be frozen at low temperatures, and its shelf life is incredibly long. Finally, I went to the pharmacy and bought every type of medicine I could think of. The night before the apocalypse, I sat on the sofa, thinking to myself. The word apocalypse always felt so distant to me. I had only ever read about it in novels, and never imagined that something so surreal would actually happen to me. I walked over to the window and looked up at the sky. There was no moon tonight, but the sky was still emitting a strange glow. It was so red When did the sky turn dark red? Is it going to snow? At that moment, my inner dread reached its peak. Just then, scattered snowflakes began to fall, signaling that an apocalyptic catastrophe was about to strike. The next morning, the scattered snow had turned into a massive blizzard. In just 2 hours, I looked through the living room window and watched the snow falling heavier and heavier. The snow on the ground was getting thicker by the minute. The sky was covered by thick, heavy clouds, not letting a single ray of light through. The snowflakes, initially the size of soybeans, grew to the size of coins, and eventually became as big as half a fist. In all my years, it was the first time I had ever seen such heavy snow. Because it wasn't too cold yet, there was no need to move into the basement. Honestly, unless it was absolutely necessary. I didn't want to live underground. Feeling hungry, I went to the kitchen to boil some noodles. I'm not exactly great at cooking, but I figured, while the gas and electricity were still working, I should try to avoid eating my instant rations. After eating, I looked out the window again. The snow had already piled up to ankle height, and it showed no signs of stopping. My villa was adjacent to a farmer's market. Right now, it was incredibly bustling. Everyone was probably out hoarding food, given how heavily it was snowing. I even saw some kids outside having a snowball fight. Building snowman kids will always be kids. Because of all the sorting and prepping, I hadn't rested properly lately. So I turned on the AC and went back to bed to catch up on sleep. When I woke up, because the AC was running, the room was very warm. The Wi-Fi was still working. The news said the city would start central heating tomorrow. But mostly the reports were focused on this sudden, bizarre blizzard. I walked to the window. The wind had picked up. I could feel the chill even through the glass. I glanced at the thermometer on the wall. Indoor temperature, 26°C. The AC was working perfectly, even though the central heating wasn't on yet. Thankfully, the power hadn't been cut. On the third day, I took a stroll outside. The temperature outside wasn't too terribly low yet. My phone showed it was 15°C today. Central heating was working, so I didn't even need the AC. Wearing short sleeves inside the house actually felt a bit hot. The sky was still a dark, ominous red. It had been snowing for 4 days straight, but it was only super heavy on the first day. It gradually started getting lighter. Today is the 5th day. The snow finally stopped. The temperature inside the villa was stable at 25°C. The heating this year is really good. The internet was still running smoothly. Although my city didn't seem to have changed much. All over the country, many regions were still plunging into severe blizzards. This massive snowfall was completely unprecedented. The government named this cold wave Shirley. In the blink of an eye, 2 weeks had passed. The dark red sky remained outside for 14 days straight. The sun never showed its face again, as if it had never existed at all. I don't know why, but ever since the snow stopped, it started getting colder and colder outside. There were fewer and fewer pedestrians on the streets. Everyone complained about the freezing weather, refusing to go outside. During these 2 weeks, a lot of things happened. Because I wasn't too busy, I stocked up on even more fresh vegetables at home. The inheritance my parents left me was almost entirely spent. As the temperature continued to drop, prices skyrocketed. Everyone was hoarding vegetables for the winter, and the vendors made a huge fortune. Days passed by just like that. It was dropping degrees every single day. The temperature inside could only be maintained at 25°C by keeping the AC on. You could barely see any cars or pedestrians outside. Even the kids who were playing snowball fights earlier had stopped coming out. The community group chat was full of complaints. People were discussing why it was so unnervingly cold this year. Since the villa I rented was in an affluent neighborhood, the heating and security were top-notch. For now, as long as I didn't go out, I could maintain the status quo. I read about the situation in other regions online. In some places, due to the sustained freezing cold, all outdoor work had been completely halted. Some high-latitude areas in our country were already experiencing severe power shortages, temporarily losing contact with the outside world. Because the disaster struck so suddenly, many people without proper heating equipment had no choice but to head to shelters. There was actually a shelter right next to my villa complex. But luckily, our neighborhood was still relatively safe. Every household had hoarded plenty of food. Power and heating were normal, so there was no need to go out and seek refuge. Another week passed just like that. Today was exceptionally cold outside. Fierce winds howled violently, dragging the temperature inside my house down with it. I checked the indoor thermometer. 20°C. I immediately cranked up the AC. I lay in bed, wrapping myself tightly in my quilt. My house couldn't rely solely on central heating anymore. Even though the heating system was still holding on, its effectiveness had plummeted. In just 2 short weeks, the temperature had nosedived drastically. This was an unprecedented catastrophe. The calmer and more beautiful the days before a disaster, the more devastating and shocking the devastation is when it finally hits. Today, people in the neighborhood started leaving one by one, even though the heating was still functioning. I guess they had simply run out of food. The community group chat was exceptionally chaotic. Many people still thought this was just a regular, albeit heavy, snowstorm. They didn't take it seriously, thinking buying a little extra food would be enough. However, one message caught my attention. It was from a middle-aged woman saying her child had a fever. She was begging for fever reducers and some food. I remembered the kids who were out playing and having a snowball fight a while ago. I wondered if it was one of them. Although I felt a bit sympathetic, as an avid reader of apocalyptic novels, I knew very well the meaning behind the phrase, "In the apocalypse, the bleeding hearts die first," so I didn't say a word in the group chat. Under extreme conditions, the human heart is unpredictable. Exposing my supplies would only bring me endless danger. If people really found out that I had a massive stockpile here, they would definitely break into my villa. With my skinny arms and legs, I have zero combat ability. Just thinking about how that would end terrifies me. I decided that from now on, whoever needed help, I would simply ignore them. It's best not to invite trouble for myself. Beautiful. But I never expected that later on, this middle-aged woman would almost get me killed. Now, the first floor of the villa is uninhabitable. Staying there even a minute longer freezes me to the bone. Thankfully, the heating system can still barely hold up. I thought about it and moved a portion of the basement supplies up to the first floor. Calculating it, the food here should last me about 2 months. I planned that once these supplies were completely exhausted, I would retreat to the relatively safe, warm basement to live. It got colder again today. The temperature kept plummeting. The outdoor temperature had reached 50 C. It's really getting more and more freezing. The snow started falling again. At first, it was light snow, but slowly turned into a massive blizzard. That family who asked for help in the group chat before still hadn't left for the shelter and were still begging for food in the chat. But to my surprise, she directly mentioned me this time. I frowned and wondered. Did she see me when my supplies were being delivered to the villa? Regardless, I couldn't reply to any of her messages right now. I could only play dead. Just like that, I bunkered down in the villa for over half a month. The temperature outside had reached 60 C. The group chat was full of complaints that it was impossible to buy food anymore. Even if you could find some, it would cost an astronomically absurd price. At this point, I felt so grateful that I listened to my aunt and hoarded all these supplies. Otherwise, with my usual lazy attitude, I would have starved or frozen to death long ago. Rich people started trying to trade luxury cars for a bag of rice or gold for 2 pieces of bread. But no one paid attention to these offers. They got 0 replies. The food stockpile on the ground floor was probably only enough for half a month. After that, I'd have to move down to the basement. Even with the AC running indoors, it could only be maintained at 15 C. The central heating was getting worse and worse. Households everywhere started running completely out of food. Finally, the other residents in the complex started preparing to head to the shelter. I looked at my inventory. There wasn't much food left on the ground floor, but I wasn't afraid. Because my basement stash was massive, there was nothing to fear. Someone who reached the shelter sent a message in the group saying the shelter wasn't opening its doors, and it was completely packed inside. It was impossible to get in. It turns out the shelter was already overflowing. It could no longer take in anyone new. I was scrolling through my phone checking the situation, when suddenly a loud bang scared the life out of me. It was the sound of glass shattering. Just as I was about to go check, it was immediately followed by a gunshot. A gun was fired? This is insane. When people are driven to a dead end, they are truly capable of doing anything. In just one night, the world had completely turned upside down. The scary thing isn't just natural disasters, it's the human heart. It's hard to imagine, in the apocalypse, without the constraint of the law, just how far into madness people will sink. Suddenly, a new message popped up in the group chat. It was the woman who had been begging for food. She was rallying other residents to come break into my house to rob my food. I let out a cold sneer. People are truly sinister. Playing dead wasn't enough to escape this. But I was already prepared. I couldn't delay any longer. I'd just leave the remaining supplies on the ground floor to them. I had cameras installed in the house anyway. I turned off the AC and took the remote with me. It was time to go hide in the basement. I grabbed a few things quickly and hurried to the first floor. By then, someone was already smashing the door. Right after that, there were even sounds of gunshots. Oh my God, damn it to hell. What a bunch of completely psychotic bastards. Without looking back, I rushed into the basement. Once inside, I completely locked the blast-proof steel door from the inside. I had anticipated that this day might come. So I had installed 3 layers of doors for the basement. The walls were reinforced too, making it much sturdier than the rest of the villa. With this, even a regular grenade couldn't blow it open. This was a genuine bulletproof, blast-proof level of security. It made all the huge sums of money I spent totally worth it. Entering the basement, the temperature was vastly different from outside. Although it was a bit chilly, it was just the natural coolness of a basement, not freezing cold. Through this incident, I finally understood just how malicious the human heart could be. I could have held out for a while longer upstairs, but the first floor was no longer habitable. The basement space was huge. The area for storing supplies and resting was more than enough for now. The extreme cold wave surely had just drawn its curtains. And because of that crazy woman, I was forced to move from the ground floor to the underground. If anything else went wrong, I would truly have no way out. In the days to come, who knew if the temperature would continue to plunge? At this rate, the days of hitting 80°C weren't far off. My main meal today could only be instant noodles, because all the fresh vegetables I bought were upstairs. By now, they had probably all been looted. I opened the security cameras on my phone and saw that the main door of the house had been breached. The quality of that door really was garbage. Several people had swarmed into the house. Some were holding guns. Some were holding axes. They were currently squabbling over how to divide the first floor supplies, cursing at each other. I saw that crazy woman among them too. Her kid was there as well. At that moment, the group upstairs noticed the door to my basement, but they couldn't even put a dent in it. It pissed them off so much they were screaming insults. Watching from my end of the camera, I wanted to laugh. This is a super thick blast-proof door. Even a grenade wouldn't break it. With just you few idiots? Forget about it. In the end, they decided to camp out in my villa for now and look for a chance to break the door open later. Over the next few days, I used the cameras to watch their every move. Every day they kept trying to break the door. And unfortunately for them, every attempt failed. As time went on, the supplies upstairs were eaten up until almost nothing was left. They started getting violently irritable. Then, one day, they got into a massive fight over the remaining food. It ended with a few people dead, driven by sheer starvation. Their expressions turned extremely twisted and eerie, and the dead were treated as food by the survivors. Watching that scene, a wave of nausea and disgust washed over me. For the next few days, the temperature in the basement didn't change much. It remained warm and comfortable. A month passed. Among the intruders, one man somehow managed to get his hands on a grenade. He was going to blow the door open. I panicked. Even though this door was rated blast-proof, I hadn't actually tested it against a bomb. Bang! A massive explosion. I felt the entire room shake. But the door only suffered a few superficial marks. On the surface, it wasn't breached at all. I secretly rejoiced. The door was solid enough. The food hoarded in the basement was enough for me to eat until the end of time. I certainly didn't have to worry about starving. But precisely because I was underground, it was both my sanctuary and my dead end. If an unforeseen emergency happened down here, I would undoubtedly be dead. Another month passed. The central heating facilities completely failed. But strangely enough, the internet and electricity were still running fine. Through the camera, I saw that the man who blew up the door had eaten all the remaining food. The temperature in the living room had already dropped to 40 C. I figured he'd probably leave in a few days. The outdoor temperature had reached a ridiculous minus 70 degrees Celsius. It's hard to imagine. In just a few short months, the temperature had hit rock bottom, and it was still steadily declining. For the first time, I felt just how insignificant humanity is in the face of nature. I used to imagine all kinds of apocalyptic scenarios that could happen. Back then, I only thought it sounded thrilling, but when the disaster actually struck, all I could feel was raw fear and dread. And the only thing I could do was hide in this tiny underground space. Whether I eventually ate through all my supplies or just sat here waiting for death, I was determined to live as long as possible. 2 days later, I checked the security camera again and saw that man lying on the bed. He hadn't moved all day. No food, no water. Not even shifting his body. It looked like he had finally kicked the bucket. The temperature continued its rhythmic descent, dropping about 3 or 4 degrees lower than the day before. Today, it went from 70 C down to 80 C. The internet and power were still on. This really puzzled me. I passed another month in relative peace. The temperature drop was starting to level off, though there wasn't much room left for it to drop anyway. It was now 90 C outside. You could say that if anyone exposed their bare skin outside, it would undergo necrosis instantly. Due to the constant dread of the disaster, I was losing my appetite more and more. My weight had dropped quite a bit too. But in order to survive, I had to force myself to eat something. Then suddenly, one day, when I woke up, I found that the internet and power were totally gone. The basement started to become incredibly cold. Without electricity, I was plunged into pitch darkness. I turned on a small camping lantern and sat on the sofa, at a complete loss for what to do. The temperature in the basement plummeted drastically along with the surface temperature. It could no longer maintain a comfortable temperature for the human body. Now, the room could barely hold at around 11 C. Even wearing 2 layers of clothes felt chilly. A week later, the outside temperature finally hit 100 C. Sigh. Thinking it over, I had no choice but to light the fireplace, hoping it would bring me at least a little bit of warmth. The fireplace in the basement was something I had contractors install before the apocalypse. It was precisely because I predicted that a day like today might come. Because I had read many apocalyptic novels, where the protagonist ultimately survived by relying on a fireplace for heat. The ventilation pipe on the roof probably wouldn't be sealed off by the heavy snow for now. Would be enough to melt the ice and snow around the pipe. But this thing was a double-edged sword for me. While the fireplace could provide me with heat, the smoke generated from burning wood could also attract unwanted guests. Over the following days, I constantly switched camera angles to monitor the inside and outside of the house. Honestly, I was still terrified that more intruders would break in. Speaking of which, this camera system cost me a fortune. The boss told me it was expensive because it held a charge extremely well and was very energy efficient. At first, I didn't believe him. But looking at it now, it was exactly as he said. I didn't even know how many degrees it was outside anymore. The main gate of the villa had long been buried under deep snow, plunging the entire first floor into absolute darkness. But in contrast, Down in the basement by the fireplace, the glow from the burning wood made the room feel relatively bright. I had hoarded so many supplies. Lasting a year or so wouldn't be a problem at all. But what happens after a year or so? If the apocalypse still hasn't ended by then, what am I supposed to do? However, living in constant fear day after day had left me completely exhausted, physically and mentally. Did I make all these preparations only to end up dead anyway? Sure enough, the happy endings in novels don't happen in real life. Early the next morning, I opened my eyes, and the room was pitch black. I realized the fire in the fireplace had gone out. I hurriedly got up, threw a few more logs into the fireplace, and lit it. The wood quickly caught fire. Sitting in front of the hearth, I finally felt warm again. Days passed by, one after another, just like this. My phone was completely out of battery. I couldn't check the cameras anymore. The power stations and lanterns broke down one by one. I had already used up half of my heat pack stash. The hope of the apocalypse ending grew slimmer and slimmer. At the same time, I barely slept. The extreme anxiety of the apocalypse constantly haunted me. Tonight, I was completely an insomniac. Lying in bed, I thought to myself, I know that the end of human life is always death. It's just that some go early, and some go later. If I keep stressing over these things, even if I survive the apocalypse, I'd probably end up severely depressed. That night, I figured out a lot of things. I stopped dwelling on these what-ifs. I just need to live in the present. It's just the apocalypse, right? As long as I don't give up on myself, nobody can give up on me. And so, another half a year passed. The temperature had long since dropped to 130°C. After reaching this point, it stopped dropping further. One afternoon, the sound of the AC running suddenly echoed through the room. I instinctively looked at the unit. I found that it was actually working. What is going on? Has the power been restored? Does that mean the apocalypse is ending? After charging my phone, I turned it on. The internet was back too. Just as I expected, there was a new official broadcast from the government. The official announcement stated that the nation was doing its utmost to repair regional power grids and finding ways to restore the heating systems. Please stay safe and patiently wait for rescue. The network signal was spotty, but checking my phone, I saw that the surface world had been completely engulfed by ice and snow. The entire city looked like a giant ice sculpture carved by nature. The sky was still blanketed by thick clouds, not letting a single ray of light through. Snow blew fiercely outside, and gale-force winds continued to ravage the earth. The average surface temperature had reached 140°C. This is truly a temperature where a person would be turned into an ice block the second they stepped outside. But no matter what, the restoration of power and internet allowed people to see a glimmer of hope. Another 3 months passed. With the power back on, I returned to a relatively normal life. I no longer had to live my days in total darkness. Then, I don't know how many days later, the heavy snowfall suddenly stopped one night. After that, the temperature outside gradually started to rise bit by bit. I walked out of the basement and went up to the second floor, standing by the window, though I could still feel the biting cold. And outside was still covered in deep layers of snow. The snow had stopped. Everything is going to be okay. After all, as long as you're alive, there's hope. I suppose the sun's return won't be too far away now.